Urban explorers, what is the creepiest we're not alone experiences you've had? So there's a moderately well-known abandoned mental hospital close to my town. A few months back a few friends and I went to explore a bit. Not a rare thing for people here. We found this setup of a few folding chairs and a couple of old mattresses with blankets and whatever else you'd imagine on them. We chilled there for about 10 minutes and then went on with our adventure upwards. Pretty uneventful from then on, a few really cool graffiti murals, awesome view from the roof. When we were coming back down we passed through the room and all the chairs were folded up and neatly stacked against the wall and the beds were made. Or at least as close to that as it could have been. Whoever did it would have most likely known that we were there and waited for us to leave to do all of that, as it was only a time frame of about 45 minutes. No threats or anything, just an eerie feeling of being watching in an abandoned mental hospital. Edit, Kings Park Psychiatric Center. I replied to like 4 of y'all and got about 20 others asking Lamau. Oh man, haha, my ex-girlfriend, a friend of hers and I did almost the exact same thing, also while exploring an abandoned psychiatric hospital. In our case we heard a group of teenagers coming in as we were on our way out and decided to have a little fun with them. We waited for them to pass through a classroom that you couldn't avoid due to structural damage in the corridor, and really quickly lined up the desks that had been sort of scattered around the room. I wish we had stuck around to see how they responded, but her friend had to get home. I should be thankful this is my creepiest story. So I was at an abandoned medical school in a pretty bad city with my friend. My friend told me homeless people squat there but only on the first floor. She even said one of her friends sat their backpack down and had it stolen by one of them in plain sight. So we avoided it and explored the second floor. We kept hearing random noises like someone loosely following us, so we kept on guard but never saw anything. We were then in this room and heard a louder noise and look over to see a cat just chillin'. It was the cat following us all along, cause after stopping to pet it and moving on, it continued following us, making the noises we kept hearing. It eventually came right up to us to be pet. We assumed it was a stray and wanted to get it help, so we agreed that if it followed us out we'll take it somewhere or to someone who will care for it. It followed us outside then immediately ran from us when we were like lol velp, guess we got a cat now, so I went to see where it went. Only to see one of the doors to the bando open and this like 6 feet plus dude walk out and yell at me, "Y'all fucking with my cat." I just about shit myself thinking I was about to get murdered or something, haha. I was like, "Oh, is that your cat?" He followed us out. He's like, "Yeah, it's my cat, Colonel Mustard. Get over here." And the cat comes running to him. He introduced himself and we talked for a bit. He was actually a really cool guy. Said he lives there and studies psychology and stuff to keep occupied. Bonus, picture of Colonel Mustard. So Terry's this building in my city that has been abandoned for over a decade. The building itself covers over 40 acres, so it's pretty well known by explorers that if the cops come they won't search for you inside but wait for you to come out. The second time I went to explore this building we were looking for a way inside. Keep in mind this is taking place early in the morning, maybe 3 a.m. We come across this section of the building that was a large outdoor amphitheater. We walked down to the center and went up to the boarded up windows, and ever so faintly on the other side of the wood you could hear someone talking to themselves. We got the fuck out of there. I explored part of an old Nike or Atlas missile site one night with a few friends. As we were leaving, someone started shining a laser pointer at us from the woods. Somehow, we couldn't actually see where they were, even though that's usually pretty easy to do with laser pointers. I still wonder if it was just a laser pointer and not a laser sight instead. The area I'm currently in is a touristy beach place, so being winter it's completely devoid of life. There's a lot of apartments/hotels around that are just shells, no windows or doors. At 2 a.m. I went to go to the local garage to grab some smokes as we were running low. It's dead quiet and you can hear the tiniest sounds. I was walking past one such building when I felt like I was being watched. I looked up and around but I couldn't hear or see anything, so I carried on walking but slower, now trying to be as quiet as possible while listening for anything strange. Suddenly every single dog around just went crazy, barking, like dead silence to deafening barking in a second. Made me jump 10 feet, looked up, and on the 3rd floor of an apartment that got no windows or doors put in yet is a single dog just staring at me. I literally turned around and walked straight back home and figured that I'd just go at a more reasonable time. Edit, picture of what the building looks like. I lived in China for the last 18 years. At night I would get bored and go out riding on my scooter and just explore various roads. This incident was about 14 years ago. There was a place I had been to in the daytime, down a country road that was mostly green hills and forest. Somewhere there was a little settlement where they were building a whole bunch of new things, including an apartment building that was at least 20 stories high. It was just a shell, no windows or doors or fittings yet, or even stairs, just the concrete for each of the floors and some of the walls. That night I rode past, and stopped. There were bamboo ladders leading up to the first few floors, and more bamboo ladders inside going all the way up the building. The entire building was filled with people, and they were families too. Mom, Dad, cooking pots, they had little fires going and were cooking, children and even babies. There were hundreds of people living there, and as I stopped there with the engine running, more and more heads started appearing, people watching me. They were all silent, nobody called out. They just looked. So I rode off again, and felt spooked. My friends and I were exploring an abandoned restaurant in this beach town one winter night. We snuck in through a broken window on the shore side, to avoid being spotted by any cars driving by. Overall, inside it was your typical abandoned restaurant, but was still really cool to check out. There was a long bar, tables tossed about, etc. We walked downstairs into a wine cellar, and started walking through the labyrinth of hallways. The basement was deceptively larger than we would have expected for a beachside restaurant. Anyway, we wander into this room off one of the hallways, and shine our flashlight in the corner, and we see an unmade bed, cot, with all of the trappings of someone currently living there, a safety razor next to the mirror, random other belongings. Our stomachs immediately dropped as we realized we were currently in someone's living quarters, and promptly noped the fuck out of there. To this day we still don't know if the person was hiding in the basement with us, waiting for us to leave, or if we stumbled on it while they were out and about. Either way, we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched by someone from the shadows of that basement. So I take a lot of time lapses of nature and stuff. One clear night I decided to drive out to the middle of nowhere to get a time lapse of the stars. I found a lake that seemed like a cool spot to shoot and set up. About 20 minutes in I hear a noise and look up to see a light above me. Sure enough, a drone is right above me just hovering. It freaked me out, so I booked it out of there. I later learned I was trespassing on government property. I live in a big US West Coast city. In a neighborhood where most homes go right up to the sidewalk property line and have a yard in back. My place is the opposite, house is at the back of the lot, front yard keeps me buffered from street noise. It's a nice, dark little oasis in the city. My house has a double door, split door, so the top can open independently of the bottom. I often leave the top open when the weather's nice. I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, all of 15 feet from the door. It's nighttime, I'm reading, and the door's more or less directly in front of me. The porch lights off, yard's dark, the only lights from the dimmed reading lamp I'm using. The wind keeps blowing the top part of the door open, closed, open, closed. I'm used to it, happens all the time, doesn't sound out of place. Until the door kind of misses a beat, I don't hear it thud closed. I look up, and it's perfectly still, only open 2 or 3 inches. It's one of those WTF are my eyes seeing moments. There's like a 15-mile-per-hour wind outside. How is the top part of the door partially open and perfectly still? Then my eyes or brain recognizes it, the outline of a hoodie, drawstrings, hood up. In that instant I am frozen and my heart is pounding. Someone is literally standing right there, hood up, holding my door open. I can't see his face, but he sees me noticing because he says, "You should keep your doors locked." Motherfucking what? Now my adrenaline kicks in, I jump up shouting, he bolts. I get the porch light on in time to see him running out the gate. I still wonder how long he'd been standing there or WTF he was doing/thinking. The door has been very fucking locked since then. Not urban, but definitely rural. Was good friends with a guy whose property abutted a forest. He loved to go walking through the woods at all times of the day and night since he was a kid, and this part of the forest was the opening to a broader state park/preserve. Anyway, one day, he comes into work and is so excited to tell us he found a large, two-story cabin in the woods he had never seen before. So, it's been about 20-ish years of walking through that area since he was an early teen. He described it in great detail, and was sure it was abandoned, even though there was still furniture in there. So, we, of course, were up for an adventure, and it would be neat to have a hangout that's off the grid. A week or so later, we head out with him. All of this time, he's been ridiculously excited about the place, and says he has been to it a few more times, so he knows the best way to get there. After about an hour, he gets really depressive and confused, and he tells us that the house should be right in a clearing that we just walked into. And it was a massive clearing, too, large enough for a house, at least. But there was no house at all. We walked outwards in circles for another few hours, thinking he got lost along the way, but nothing. He was completely upset by this, and he showed us marks he had made on trees that pointed to the clearing/house. By the time we got back to his house, he was almost in tears. Anyway, a few months later, he comes into work and says he saw the house again, and we ask him if we can go there. He says, "No, you don't want to do that," and is white as a sheet. That's the last thing he ever said about the house, no matter how many times we brought it up. I spent 2004 to 2009 living in a dilapidated warehouse that had a space over it converted into an apartment. In exploring the warehouse beneath it before moving in, a buddy of mine and I were discussing how the place smelled and was haunted. In making jokes about it, we started laughing when something shattered on the wall near us. We were seriously startled and contemplating what it could have been when someone shouts, "Shut the fuck up." And there's a homeless man throwing what I assume is a second bottle at us from across the space. In a non-threatening way, I calmly state, "Are you sure you should be in here?" He waves something at me and yells at me to call the police if I don't like it. We had finally worked up the courage to explore this super scary looking dilapidated house. It was boarded up really solid, nobody was getting in and out without a ton of work prying off boards. We searched exhaustively. The easier way in was to just make the damaged drywall on the back wall a little more damaged to widen the hole. As soon as we stepped in, there was something vaguely human-shaped at the top of the stairs we both saw. We bolted in terror. Of course, me and my friend were only 9 at the time. Was probably just some homeless dude better at finding entrances than us. As an adult now, I really want to go urban exploring in the NYC subway's abandoned stations. But I need to meet someone familiar with all the new post-9/11 security shit because I'm paranoid about it. An even more exciting target is the abandoned 19th Street Path station. The only even semi-modern footage is just blurs captured from passing trains, not any better than I can catch myself. But I think their security is tough. There's keypads at the tunnel entrances, presumably to disengage some security thing. There was an old house down the road from where we lived in the country. It was broken and falling apart, but as a kid that was like the biggest draw for our curiosity. We decided to travel through the brush and go inside it on one of our bike rides, and we found loads of neat stuff. Magazines. Old busted antique looking furniture. It was actually pretty cool. We knew from stories our dad told us about the house that there should have been a few nice apple trees around, so we wandered outside to go find them, but what we found was a newer van hidden around a bushy area and covered with sticks. Remnants of a camp area with smoke still coming from the campfire, but no one that we could see. We noped out of there and told our parents. Turned out it was someone who had run the border and was camping out in the woods. No other details were relayed to us about it, but pretty creepy for our 12-year-old selves. There's an old flour mill on Harbor Island in Seattle. It's been abandoned and locked up for a while. My buddies went through a pretty serious urban X phase near the end of high school, so we were going to all sorts of weird and interesting places in the area just checking it out. Got chased out by cops a few times, usual stuff. Anyway, inside this flour mill we're working our through some of the regular block areas, and our buddy swears he heard something. We all stopped dead in our tracks, lights pointed down, just listening. The amount of noise a dilapidated building makes when you're trying to be quiet is amazing, constant creaking and wind noises. Then I start to hear it. It was shuffling, with the sound of somebody dragging something across concrete. At this point I can feel my heart jumping out of my chest, the blood pulsing in my ears and head. I'm hyper aware as I try and pinpoint this sound and associate it with something I knew. By the time we're sure it's not just the wind, we've all heard the noises. There was 5 of us in there, and we're starting to think it's coming from near the stairs. We slowly, achingly, creep our way over broken glass and dirt. When we came up on the stairwell, we shined our lights down and up to the adjacent landings for the floor we were on and couldn't see anything. My buddy turns around, steps on an old water bottle on the ground, making the loudest crackling a water bottle has ever made in the history of recyclables. One of my other friends, looking back down the factory area we came through, gets startled and yells "fuck" at the sound of the water bottle. We immediately heard the most chilling, deep scream. At that instant we all just put the gas on and ran the fuck out. At the bottom of the stairwells we ran into 10 homeless people who weren't there before, but we paid them no mind and didn't stop our dead sprint until we got back to our cars. We figured it must have been some homeless person we scared with our creeping around and then sudden expletive, but we never saw the person or identified the sound. So who knows? Definitely not urban, and more sweet than scary. I was once camping in the desert, at least 30 miles in every direction from any human settlements. When I woke up, there was a full, cold, 5-gallon jug of water outside my tent. Something about this story really resonates with me. In a place where the chances of 2 people running into each other are slim to none, this simple act of kindness occurs between 2 people, without them even meeting or saying a word to each other. That's pretty neat. I was on the other end of this. There was an abandoned nunnery on the coast behind a suburban development, a very creepy but beautiful place. I loved it because it had an entirely stone chapel. Any sound you made inside had true reverb and echo a second long almost. I brought a friend in to make some recordings in the dead of night. As we're leaving, a group of laughing neighborhood kids came in on us crouched in the dark over a bunch of electronics. They ran faster than I've seen anyone run before. Reminds me of something similar a friend and I experienced. We were going to explore a supposedly haunted slaughterhouse, which in fact is actually an old grain processing plant. It's about a mile walking along a paved road. It was night time, but the moon was bright enough for us to see without needing lights. We could see 2 cell phone lights of people leaving the spot, walking towards us on the road. Friend and I didn't think much of it and kept walking down the road. The 2 girls, as it turned out, had their phones mostly pointed at the ground as they walked. That meant they didn't see us until we were probably 10 or so feet away from them. 2 dudes walking in the dark towards them in the middle of nowhere, at a supposedly haunted location. They screamed bloody fucking murder. We apologized and told them we're just going to check the place out too. Didn't even cross my mind how creepy that must have seemed to them until we had already scared the shit out of them. Whoopsie. Edit, place is in Antioch, California for any of those interested. My friends and I grew up in a town that had a large abandoned psychiatric hospital. People went in there all the time and we decided senior year of high school to sneak in at 2 Isham. We get in with flashlights and start just exploring. We get up to the 3rd floor and start hearing footsteps. We turn the flashlights off and hide in a room. We watch this big black figure shuffle by the door and down the hall. We ran the opposite way to another stairwell and got the fuck out. I'm sure it was just some homeless dude or something, but Jesus Christ, we were spooked for a while. This was back in summer 2012. Every morning my mum used to take me and my brother to our grandparents, while she went to work. My grandparents lived in a really isolated rural zone. Near my grandparents' house there was a huge abandoned factory, and I've always wanted to go to see what was in there. So I begged my uncle, he lived at my grandparents' house, to explore that building. He said yes, so we went to the building and searched for an opening to get inside. Once inside, we started to look around the place, and obviously found nothing except old machines and stuff like that. When we was about to leave, we heard noises coming from upstairs, and then steps. We saw a shadow coming towards us, so we got the feck out of there running. A few days later, I was at my grandparents' house with all my cousins. Suddenly, the neighbors rang our doorbell, and told us that there was someone breaking into our back garden. My uncle went out to check while one of my cousins called 112, local police number. Soon after the call, my uncle came back inside, and he told us that he saw that guy that had broke in, running towards the old abandoned building. I never discovered if the guy in the building and the other in the garden were the same person. Pretty fucked up story. When my house was being built, I did what you're not supposed to do, and went into the construction zone to take some pictures in the frame that was being built. I did it a few times. One of the last times I kept hearing weird noises that seemed to be sort of following me, and I totally felt like there was someone else there with me. Anyways, turned out it was a fucking raccoon that was in there. I don't know what he was doing, but when I saw him I got just as scared as if it had really been a ghost and fucking ran for it. I had an interesting phone call to the builders trying to explain that I think I saw a raccoon in the house. When I was on the road looking at the house from my car, and it looked at me out where the window is supposed to be. Rural experience, a graveyard behind my high school in the middle of cornfields was a go-to driving around spot because we had nothing else to do as teenagers. Early on in the school year, a lady parked her car in the back of the cemetery and walked into the cornfield and shot herself in the head. The graveyard is super old and on a gravel side road, so no one noticed for like a week. Kids who were running cross country smelt something rancid and reported it. Once it was investigated, the truth came out. It was weird. She wasn't even from my area, she drove around 2 hours here and had no relation to anything around the area. No note was left. It was really bizarre. Anyways, we were driving around months later telling the story to some younger students. Really trying to freak them out, but when we turned the corner to pull in the graveyard, a random car was parked in the back of the yard. We slowly rolled up on it while all of us were losing our minds, only to see a topless woman sit up from the back seat followed by a topless man. Awkward, but that was the tightest my butt had been clinched up to that point of life. Not urban, but rural. Went out for a hike with a buddy of mine. It was pretty late, maybe 2 a.m. or so. We were just shooting the shit, having a smoke on his property. We walk maybe a mile on his trail and we both just start getting this feeling like we are being watched. We just assume it's just us being high and anxious. We walk maybe another 2 minutes. I turn around and point my phone behind us and just see 2 eyes staring back in the darkness. I am from a rural area and I know that seeing eyes shine isn't that spooky, but I am talking about small raccoon or cat eyes. These eyes are massive, unblinking and staring straight at us. I feel my skin crawl just thinking about it. I start to freak out and tell him to take a look. He starts to freak out too. He thinks it's a mountain lion, and we shouldn't put our back to it. So we begin this super roundabout way of looping back and heading to his house. The entire way we walk, one person facing forward and the other walking backwards. It took us maybe an hour, and by the time we got back to his house I was shaking from adrenaline and anxiety, but we got back safe. Later that week I heard a mountain lion for the first time in my life. And let me tell you, it's fucking terrifying. I've posted this a couple of times before, but people seem to like it, so here's a copy and paste. One summer when I was a kid it somehow got popular to explore the storm drainage system underneath our neighborhood. Yes, like the ones in it, but just boring concrete. These were the round tunnels made from pre-made pieces. Getting into the pipes required crawling through a tight fit for 15 to 20 feet, but after that you could stand. As you explored the system you'd find areas that were big enough to drive a golf cart through, though it would have been impossible to get one there. Occasionally there would be odd structures, like grates that looked like prison bars that only covered half the pipe. Very rarely there would be light coming in from a grate in the road above, but most of the time we needed flashlights to see anything at all. Every single sound was nerve-wracking, because technically there shouldn't have been any sounds other than running water down there. Of course, we weren't the Goonies, so we didn't have a map or the sense to make one as we went along. Most of the local kids had gotten to know the system well enough to navigate though, and we figured out that if you got lost, you just always chose the turn that led to a bigger pipe, because the biggest one ran about a half-mile outside the neighborhood and emptied, in a 15-foot plunge, into a local pond and creek. Well, one day my brother, who was essentially fearless, and some friends decided to go a different direction from the main junction to explore a tunnel none of us had ever ventured to. I admit it, I was too scared. I don't know why on that day I was creeped out, but I was. So two friends and I stayed in the junction while my brother and his two friends went exploring. After they were gone for 10 or 15 minutes we heard terrified shouting and running footsteps echoing down the tunnels, coming toward us. My friends ran. I wanted to run, but that was my brother down there. Finally, through the dark tunnel I heard one of my brother's friends shout, "Go!" We all ran the big tunnel, because instinctively we knew that whatever was down there would catch us if we had to shimmy back through the small pipes to get out the way we came in. So we ran, hard, flashlight beams bouncing off the walls, until we finally started seeing light from where the tunnel emptied into the pond. One by one we all reached the drop and just kept running into thin air, falling into the pond below. I was terrified of heights and I didn't even know how to swim, but that didn't stop me. As I was making my way to land my brother and his friends came shooting out of the pipe and into the pond. For a moment I thought they had been playing a prank on us. But no, my brother immediately insisted that we all go home. He wouldn't even tell me what happened on the entire, dripping wet, almost a mile walk. The whole group went to my house and my brother, knowing we would all get in trouble, told my mother where we were and what we had been doing. He also told her that when he and his friends reached the next junction in the tunnel they were exploring, they came across a spot where light was trickling in from above. There was a pile of trash and debris built up around one of those half-pipe prison bar grates. And laying within that pile of trash, they saw a man, who upon hearing them, raised his head, reached out towards them, and started crawling out of the trash in their direction. So they ran. My mother called the police. They asked my brother to guide them to the location in the pipes where this happened. They found exactly what he described, but the man was gone. Within minutes there were at least a dozen police cars around our neighborhood with people and dogs searching that drainage system. They wouldn't tell us any details, but we do know that they never found the man. The dogs followed his scent to the end of the pipe at the pond, but they never picked up the scent anywhere on the ground around the pond or creek. As far as I know, none of us ever went into the storm drains again. I lived quite literally in the middle of nowhere. I worked a night job as well. I was leaving the house one night and heard gunshots, as if dozens of firearms discharged at the same time. I hit the deck and laid flat on my stomach and was freaking out. Several seconds later, I heard it again. I had my keys in my hand and got my door unlocked and crawled back inside the house. I was terrified and had no idea what was happening. I went from window to window literally expecting to see people coming from the woods. There was no one. I didn't go to work or sleep that night because I couldn't figure out WTH. I called my dad the next morning and he was beside himself. He said, "You know there was a fort there during the Civil War, right? Shots fired from the past." I was exploring an abandoned theater, since demolished, at a state school. I rarely have experiences, and mostly urbex by myself, but this particular time there were loud screeches / metal sounds and bangs that I can't attest that building ever made before or after the many times I've explored it. I knew, without a doubt, that someone was there and wanted to make themselves known. Very strange, it was the only experience I've ever had in that particular building, although others have said they experienced other things. Same complex, except the actual hospital / asylum with the padded walls and such. Only building I ever hated going into, and I only did so twice and mostly with other people. The moment you walked in you felt you weren't alone, the air felt very strange, and I always walked back out with a terrible headache that always went away as soon as you left the building and went into a different one. Ironically, it was the newest building on the campus. It's since been torn down and I don't miss it a bit. A psychic friend refused to walk near it since he got a strange vibe from it also, completely separate and without knowing my own experience with the building. When development finally started happening, the poor demo crew lost a lot of members that freaked out after hearing screaming / being touched while cleaning the buildings out / prepping for demo. I never experienced anything that major as I tend to go in with an open mind, but it doesn't surprise me. On the flip side, I gave a bunch of amateur urbexes a scare too. My boyfriend and I were in a mostly empty newer building on the same complex, and we heard a bunch of teenagers being stupid / yelling / etc. You know how young ones are. Anyway, we were in the coat / locker room of the building and I was talking to him. You couldn't see him though, and I was backlit because the window was behind me. They came loudly through the door and I just sort of silently looked at them, didn't blink and didn't move and didn't say anything. They kinda had this freaked out look on their face, then backed up and left the building. I still giggle at that one. TLDR, got attacked by a homeless guy with a harpoon. Finally one where I can share the maddest thing that has happened to me. This is roughly 8 to 9 years ago. Me and my friends had just started passing our driving tests. We were 17 to 18, so we'd go for drives in the late evenings to explore scary or haunted local places. This particular evening wasn't really overly interesting, but we were on our way to a pretty nice pub / restaurant that's located a bit out of the way of everything else, and we pulled over into a viewpoint as one of the guys needed a bathroom break. There were no bathrooms. From the small car park there was a path to a gated house, another path that led down to a beach and also an opening with an old damaged gate, that had enough space on its sides to just walk around it. Behind the gate was seemingly just a bunch of trees / bushes / forest. The guy went in that direction and came back weirdly excited saying there's a creepy / abandoned looking caravan just sat in the middle of the foresty area, with a load of camping chairs set up outside it. Just for the record, we were never troublemakers, we liked to have a laugh but we had absolutely zero bad intentions here. If you stepped just past the gate you could see the back of the caravan and some of the chairs. It did look in disrepair and the window was smashed. No signs of life though. Somehow as a group we decided we'd go to the pub place for a bit of food, then come back again and have a proper look at this caravan. When we came back it was now 11 PM, so pitch dark and there were no lights there at all. Clear sky though, so the moon gave us some visibility. We decided to slowly sneak up to the caravan, maybe have a look what's inside and just go from there. Even though at this stage there were still no signs of life or danger, 2 guys were too scared and stayed behind the gate, while 4 of us started making the 30 to 40 meter walk to the caravan. Thinking back to it, the silence was way too eerie even though this was the middle of nowhere, and I still very clearly remember how quickly it went downhill. As we got close to the caravan, I suddenly noticed an old looking push bike propped up against the side of it that we couldn't see before. Alarm bells instantly went off and I started to whisper, I was second, to the lead guy to let him know, which is when someone suddenly jumped out from a bush just past the caravan. This is without a doubt the second scariest moment of my life so far. The first happened moments later. We all started screaming and sprinting back to our cars. I subconsciously realized I had just been overtaken by the lead guy, yet as I reached the gate I heard very quick heavy footsteps behind me. This is scary moment number one of all time for me. We had our two cars parked up just in front of the gate, but facing it, absolutely idiotic setup for a quick getaway. I managed to somehow grab my keys and jump into mine amidst absolute chaos. Everyone seemed to be running about screaming and my heart was pounding. So I jump into my car and switch the engine on, which turns on the lights which now illuminate the guy who was chasing us, and he's waving around a long fucking metal-tipped harpoon. I remember a vague feeling of safety inside my car, but me turning the engine on got his attention onto me. I think he may have thought I'd panic and drive forward over him, and he hit the bonnet of my car with his harpoon. However, he used the blunt end, so I'm thankful for that. Two others hopped into my car, but the other driver couldn't get his keys out, so him and the rest ran out of the car park onto a completely dark 60-mile-per-hour road that went steeply downhill. Everyone ran downhill apart from what I guess is the genius of the group who went uphill on his own. I somehow had enough nerves to reverse back whilst being careful not to hit anyone, then drive out the car park. Guy was stood there waving his harpoon still and shouting. I couldn't make out what he was saying amidst the chaos, but thankfully didn't chase me. We managed to rendezvous some distance down the road. The guys who ran downhill covered really impressive distance in a short amount of time, all apart from uphill guy who we couldn't see and couldn't get through to on the phone, so that was concerning. Someone suggested calling the police. I thought, sure, let's tell them 6 of us sneaked up to someone in some woods in the middle of the night and he chased us away. That'll make us sound great. Next step was to retrieve the other car as the guy finally got his keys out. To be honest, we had expected Harpoon Dude to have smashed it up a bit, but he never even touched it. However, he was still stood there, now just behind the gate. Driver 2 started trying to reason with him, but the guy started yelling something about throwing rocks at his caravan and smashing the window. We didn't of course do any of that, but clearly this was a down on his luck guy who had been bullied by others before we came along. He eventually retreated and I had to drive right up to the other car for the driver to retrieve it, and that was pretty much it, except I couldn't sleep that night and was mortified. With the benefit of hindsight, what we did was of course dumb. We didn't know the guy was there, but we shouldn't have bothered him at all, especially that late at night. I knew no details about him until around a year ago when an article popped up on the local news saying the police kicked him out of there as he was staying there illegally. Honestly, I just felt bad for the guy, and I don't think he's a bad dude at all. He could have caused us some serious damage to our cars, and that's not even mentioning the fact he could have clearly got me in the back with that harpoon. 10/10 for the bush disguise though. He could have stopped there after jumping out and we would never have come back. Edit. One funny detail I forgot to mention is the 2 dudes who stayed by the gate initially thought we were running back screaming as a joke to scare them, so they just stood there laughing at first. It's only when one of them realized there was one person too many they realized it was no joke, lol. I've shared this before, but one night my friend and I were walking back to his place after a concert. It was pretty late and we decided to take a shortcut through a construction site because we were tired. Since all the streets around the construction site were closed, it was completely empty, as if the whole area was abandoned like in a zombie apocalypse, with just the 2 of us in the South Loop area of Chicago. We're crossing this small bridge and just chatting away about what we liked the most about the show. I was looking at him and then turned my head forward and was face to face with what looks like a zombie rat. Someone had taken a mummified rat or squirrel or something and used wire to position it like it was pouncing midair at your face. Scared the fuck out of me. Here is a picture I snapped of it with my shitty phone. The combination of the abandoned construction site and the zombie rat creeped both of us out, so we said, fuck this, and ran until we hit a busy street with other people around.